Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin with an apology. I'm sorry that I can't be with you this afternoon in Adelaide. I had every hope and expectation of being there and was looking forward to it with great excitement and great joy. Um, excuse me. Unfortunately, in late February, I came down with an upper respiratory infection that has laid me low and put me down for about 3 weeks. And when it came time on Tuesday, March 10th, for me to get on an airplane to head to Adelaide, it just wasn't in the cards. And as a result, I called Dr. Sim, filled him in on what was going on and the developments in my life in terms of my health and well-being. And he could not have been more gracious and could not have been more accommodating and making sure that my health came first and that everyone would work around the, the problems that my circumstances presented to the best of their ability and not give it another thought. And I appreciate Patrick's understanding. I've been speaking and have been flying around the world for things related to chiropractic for a long time, and I've canceled very, very few events, and I'm sorry that this is one of them. But when I think about the timing of your conference, the Concordia, this year on March 14th, I see it split between Friday the 13th and the Ides of March on March 15th. And 419 years ago, Shakespeare warned us. In fact, he warned Julius Caesar through the oracle that it was incumbent upon him or wise for him to beware of the Ides of March. And in 1785, about 235 years ago, Robert Burns, in his poem To a Mouse, reminded us that sometimes the best laid plans of mice and men go awry. And in many ways, that has happened this weekend for the Concordia Conference, certainly for me personally, and on a global basis on levels that 6 weeks ago or 6 months ago, none of us could have possibly even imagined. Fortunately, none of the circumstances having to do with COVID-19 had anything to do with my circumstances and the change in plans, but nonetheless, we are where we are, and I regret that I could not be with you this weekend. Patrick and I chatted about, what I could do to help in any way, and the suggestion came up about recording in a Zoom format the remarks that I had planned to make, and they would consider the planning committee would consider either using them during the conference or sending them along to the participants afterwards as the circumstance and situation would be best served. So here goes. So if you'll stay with me for the next 30 minutes or so, I'd like to chat with you a little bit about what Patrick and I envisioned for this presentation many months ago when the first discussions of the Concordia Conference were put on the table. And Patrick approached me at that time and asked if I would be willing to participate as a speaker, and I was thrilled. I had planned to be present as a member of the board of the Australian Chiropractic College, but to have an opportunity to be on the program was all the sweeter for me personally and professionally. Patrick and I began to chat about what it is that I might bring to the table that would be of help and import and of use to you, the supporters of the Australian Chiropractic College and the ACC tribe in Australia and beyond. And we talked about the idea that I've, throughout my career, had the opportunity to do this twice before. That is, begin and be on the starting faculty of a new chiropractic college. First in 1975 at Life Chiropractic College, now Life University in Atlanta, Georgia. And then again in 1981 at Life Chiropractic College West in California. So I've gone through the process that Dr. Sim, the administration, the faculty, the board, and the student body are going through. I've been through that twice. I can tell you that the people that have brought the institution to this point have never worked harder, longer, or more diligently on any other project in their careers than they have on this one. That's what an effort of this magnitude demands and requires of everyone that's involved in it. So I'd like to begin my thoughts today looking at chiropractic education and the status of the profession, so on, with an acknowledgement to Dr. Sim for his dedication, for his commitment, for his sacrifice, and for that of his family. There's been a lot of meals that they ate alone without Dad around. There's been a lot of nights that they've had school plays and different events and sporting events, and Dad wasn't able to make it because he was someplace in Australia or around the world doing our bidding on behalf of the Australian Chiropractic College and on behalf of the profession, and in particular, the perspective in the profession that you and I know and love and share. So hats off to Patrick and his family for all of their dedication and commitment. We are very, very grateful, and we will owe you a debt of gratitude that we will never, ever be able to repay. Patrick and I also discussed the idea that having been involved in U.S. Chiropractic education from about 1973, 74 through the current, I've seen the profession evolve from a period of no accreditation through recognition of the Council on Chiropractic Education, then recognition by the regional accrediting bodies in the United States, and now the movement of chiropractic and chiropractic institutions in the larger multidisciplinary environments. At the same time, I had the good fortune to be a participant in 1988 in Sydney for the World Chiropractic Congress that was held at the Opera House and the Intercontinental Hotel, as I recall. My son, who was 12 at the time, and I had the good fortune to travel together. We stayed at the George's Hotel or St. George Hotel, I'm not sure which it is, in the Rocks. And it was during one of the anniversaries of Australia and the relationship with the United Kingdom. And the Ark Royal was there, and several members of the royal family were there. And it was a grand, grand time to be in Sydney, to be in Australia, and a wonderful introduction for my son Don and I to chiropractic in Australia and to the Australian people. It was our first visit there, and I'm pleased to say the first of many over the years. During the course of that conference, I was invited to be on a panel with a gentleman known very well to probably all of you, Professor Drake, a very senior academic in Australia, greatly respected across the nation and around the world for that matter. And I had no idea the magnitude of the man that I was sitting down next to, and his contribution to higher education and in particular higher education management. And I was a green, wet behind the ears novice who really hadn't earned his place at the table, sitting with a senior statesman of higher education. And excuse me, we had differing views as I was advocating for the value of a single degree granting institution, where Professor Drake was advocating for the need for programs such as chiropractic that had been freestanding single degree institutions to be incorporated into the university system within the Australian educational framework. It was a very cordial exchange, very respectful on his part, and certainly I tried to be on mine. But we each had varying views, and here it is many, many years down the road, and the same conversation is going on. And the Australian Chiropractic College is the focus of that discussion today. So Patrick and I chatted a little bit about those kinds of evolutionary issues. We also talked about the fact that the World Federation of Chiropractic was formed at that meeting at the World Chiropractic Congress in 1988. And as luck would have it, I had the opportunity to serve on the council, the board of directors of the World Federation for almost 30 years from that point forward. And it was a great part of my career and my experience, and gave me an education and an opportunity to see chiropractic around the globe that very few of us in chiropractic ever have the opportunity to have. So I was very grateful for that. And so we batted around a number of different ideas and different concepts. And as a bit of background, I started doing a little research on the history of chiropractic and the establishment of the chiropractic profession in Australia. And I came across a series of fascinating stories. And I came back to Patrick and I said, you know, I'd really like to talk about this, how it all began for the profession in Australia, and in particular, how it all began for the profession in South Australia. And Patrick said, great. So I went about that, and I started out looking at beginning with a paper by Rolf Peters and Marianne Chance. And it was looking at the first 40 years of chiropractic in Australia. And it was very colorful. It had tremendous detail. It had tremendous personal reflection on the development of the profession and how it affected the current situation. And it was a great paper and a great perspective, and it gave me a bit of a background on it. And along the way, I learned about a book that I had never heard of before. And it was part of the unofficial Green Book series from the Palmer School of Chiropractic. And it was copywritten and published in 1952 by under B.J. Palmer's name and copyright. And it was published by Palmer and the International Chiropractors Association. And the title of the book, excuse me, so I don't get it wrong here, the title of the book was Forgotten Freedom, with the subtitle, A Thrilling Play-by-Play Story of Chiropractic Legislation in South Australia. And here, lo and behold, in this publication that's now 68 years old, was the word-for-word discussion in correspondence, in testimony, in argument before Parliament about the establishment of the chiropractic profession. And as I started to read it, I expected to find something very dry, quite frankly, and quite uninteresting, but probably very factual. And lo and behold, it started to develop into the most gripping story that I think I've ever read about my profession. And I'd like to share some of the information with it because it's very relevant to the establishment of the Australian Chiropractic College. First of all, it's set in South Australia, and it's the story of the emergence of the profession of the chiropractic profession in South Australia, as the ACC is the story of the emergence of chiropractic education in South Australia. And as the text reports, the first persons delivering chiropractic services were not graduate chiropractors. In 1923, they were persons who had encountered chiropractic services offered by persons in different locales around the world, and had come to Australia, to come to Adelaide area, and began to practice. And again, this was 1923, so this was almost 100 years ago, and it was before there was much of the licensure that's associated with healthcare today, and certainly before there was any licensure associated with chiropractic in Australia, or registration, as you refer to it, excuse me. And these persons began their practice. And one of the people that came under care of one of these individuals was a fellow by the name of Gordon Thompson. And lo and behold, Gordon Thompson was one of those miracle cases who had a profound change in his life and circumstances under chiropractic care, and immediately left his career, left his home, left his family, traveled to Davenport, and qualified as a chiropractor at the Palmer School of Chiropractic. And he returned in 1926. And by 1926, there were two other colleagues that were there in Adelaide, in the greater Adelaide area, Dr. Wells and Dr. Coulthard. And these three individuals began the process of establishing the chiropractic profession in South Australia. And if you look at the origins of the Australian Chiropractic College, you'll find a very small handful of people, likely very few more than three, that were responsible for the germination of the thought and the idea that is today the Australian Chiropractic College. And they began to go about their practice introducing the chiropractic art and science and discipline as they were taught at the Palmer School of Chiropractic. And they were loyal and true to that perspective that they were taught in school. As they began to apply that art, that science, and that practice, they experienced great results. And these three practitioners began to develop a tremendous patient following in and around South Australia. And Dr. Thompson had the insight and the perspective to begin to cultivate within his practice people of means, people of talent, people of position, people of power, and people of influence that he could cultivate with information about chiropractic, that one day down the road, there might come a time when chiropractic legislation or registration was before Parliament, and he would need other people to call upon, not to protect his own best interest, but to protect the good that he had brought to the community that had been received by these people of capacity that he had identified. And lo and behold, that time came. But it came in a very perverse and Machiavellian way. In 1945, following World War II, with the return of countless men and women from battle and from the war to their homelands, many of them encountered an opportunity for education and training and rehabilitation and career changes as veterans and as a token of thanks from their nations for the service that they provided during the war. And this resulted in an influx of all sorts of persons in healthcare disciplines, and it ranged from physicians and dentists and nurses to physiotherapists to chiropractors to osteopaths to herbalists and naturopaths and a wide range of providers. And there were no licensure for people outside of medicine, dentistry, and nursing. And as a result, there was a need to begin a process of regulation and registration to protect the needs of the public and to advance the interests of the disciplines at the same time. Well, the physiotherapy community was the largest of those persons outside, or those groups outside of medicine and dentistry, and they began the process of seeking registration. But they did so, as I said, in a very Machiavellian way. And they began in their efforts to bring all of those other smaller groups, including chiropractors, osteopaths, naturopaths, under their umbrella so that they would be registered as physiotherapists and grandfathered in, given their registration, but they would be the last of their kind to ever come into South Australia. So the professions were left with a Hobson's choice of you can be registered, you can be legal, but you will be the end of the line of your kind in this state, in this country. The chiropractic community and the osteopathic community in particular fought very strongly against this. And it was at this time that Dr. Thompson called upon those people that he had identified and cultivated to work on behalf of the chiropractic discipline in South Australia to secure the future of the profession. And lo and behold, they organized, they educated members of the of Parliament, They educated the community at large. They provided lectures. They provided written materials. They provided what we would call today as FAQs to explain the chiropractic story, and they did so with great clarity and great precision. Dr. Thompson had done a marvelous job preparing them to help him protect their healthcare. And there was a very strong movement in Australia at that time toward national healthcare coverage. And there was also a very strong movement from a consumer perspective to make sure that the consumer had the final choice of the healthcare they received. And that was an important element that came to bear in this discussion. So as time went on, what had happened with the physiotherapy legislation was passed, and chiropractors were left in a position to either seek or accept registration as physiotherapists, protect themselves and their particular future, but put the profession's future at great danger and obvious termination once that original group of three were out of the picture. Well, they refused, and they began to mount a campaign to bring to the attention of Parliament the injustice that was being brought upon the chiropractic community, as did the osteopaths, as did other groups. And they sought to have the physiotherapy legislation repealed, and they failed miserably. And they wound up in a situation by the end of 1946, on the afternoon, according to the text of December 6th, 1946, to make their final choice on the final day of whether or not they would be outlaw practitioners or whether they would accept registration as physiotherapists. And they were advised by this group of supporters that Dr. Thompson had developed to accept registration and continue the fight after that, rather than to be outside of the law. And they did. And they began that process. They accepted their registration, and then they began to be a fight against the very registration that they had accepted. And they sought to have a chiropractic act developed. And clearly, it didn't make sense on a political level. There were three of these people in the state. And was it reasonable, was it reasonable for registration and the processes and expense and all of the detail for that to be gone through for three people? Well, Mr. Milne, who was the head of the Chiropractic Health Society of South Australia, this patient organization, and was the author the individual who actually wrote the book that BJ copyrighted, or had copywritten, in 1952. He began engaging the community and engaged it on every level, and was a masterful strategist and a masterful tactician, and together with the chiropractors involved, began the process of asserting the rights of the chiropractor. Now think about this. This is 1947, 48. Three people in the state of South Australia are at risk to have their profession taken away from them. And over the years, the Milne Chiropractic Health Society group had grown to almost 500 individuals, grown to almost 1,000 individuals. And when it came time for people to put their signature on a petition to go to Parliament, 498 of those patients signed on to that petition. And Mr. Milne was smart enough to recognize that a petition sent like that to every member of Parliament would mean very little. But when that petition was divided out to each member talk as petitioners from his or her district and his or her elected position, or supported his elected position or her elected position, it had tremendously greater power, tremendously more, it had a lot more effect. And as a result, they started to get some traction. And then in what was one of the most, I think, courageous, gutsy, and at the same time dangerous moves, these three gentlemen had identified a young boy by the name of Maurice Locke, who lived in Port Lincoln, South Australia. And unfortunately, Maurice was born with a degree of spasticity, was very limited in his capacities, and was basically written off by the society. Well, his family had heard about chiropractic care, and they petitioned the community they lived in to support him traveling to Adelaide for a period of time to receive chiropractic care. Well, when Dr. Thompson and Dr. Wells and Dr. Coulthard learned of this interest, they got into a position of frank exploitation. They certainly wanted to help Maurice, but they wanted Maurice's circumstances to help them as well. And Maurice was brought to Adelaide, and he was provided care by these chiropractors. Now imagine staking all of the future of your discipline on the results of one patient experience. And that's essentially what they were doing. In the text, I'd like to read a very short segment from it that talks about what they encountered for Maurice. And this was from a newspaper article that was published at the time. And the quote with the headline was, "Happy Christmas for Lincoln Boy." 7-year-old Maurice Locke is going to have his first Christmas at home, walking without aid, feeding himself, reciting nursery rhymes, and riding a tricycle. When he came to Adelaide about 5 months ago, he could do none of these things. But tomorrow, he will fly to his house in Port Lincoln for a month, and the neighbors who have subscribed for his expenses while in Adelaide will look on him with pride. The 5 months of care of Maurice, where he changed from a child who couldn't walk, couldn't feed himself, couldn't ride a tricycle, to one who could, became the poster child for the chiropractic profession in South Australia. And then Milne and the chiropractors involved began to recruit other individuals who had great stories. Soldiers from World War I who had been in bombing attacks and had suffered headaches for decades under chiropractic care were relieved of their suffering. And they began to bring these patients forward to demonstrate to members of parliament the positive effects of chiropractic care. Because the arguments of the day were the exact arguments of that day. There wasn't enough evidence. The textbooks didn't corroborate what the patients were saying. And what the chiropractic community did was that they brought the living, breathing, bleeding, suffering people who had improved under chiropractic care from all walks of life and all ages directly to the legislature, directly to the House of Assembly and to the Legislative Council, so that they could see for themselves. And lo and behold, members of the Assembly came forward with their testimony. Members of the Council came forward with their testimony. And the momentum began to build for the need for chiropractors to have their own registration act. And lo and behold, in 1949, November 10th, 1949, legislation was signed, the bill was enacted, and chiropractors were registered in the state of South Australia. 71 years ago, after a 20-year battle, the chiropractic community was recognized for its capacity to help humankind and given the right to serve the public in South Australia. Now, when we think about that opportunity, it's kind of mind-boggling to think of 3 men and I mean no sexist distinction, ladies, but they were men. At that moment in time, refused to lay down, refused to accept their pieces of silver, and thought it more important to protect the good that chiropractic could do over generations to come versus the moment of their personal need. In the United States, the Native American community, when they look at decisions to be made on behalf of their people, they don't think about today. They think about the implications of the decision 7 generations down the road. And Thompson and Wells and Coulthard were looking 7 generations down the road. Just as the founders, just as the individuals who have been the core and the essence of the Australian Chiropractic College are looking 7 generations down the road. They all had successful practices. They all had good economic circumstances. But they put those at risk to work on behalf of the needs of the profession for generations to come. And the fight that's going on in healthcare, we like to think of it as something unique of our time. It goes back to antiquity. It goes back to the Greek gods. Read about Hygeia. Read about Asclepius. Hygeia was the goddess of health. Asclepius, the god of healing. One was about intervention. One was about strengthening the host. One was about quality of life, about how one lived one's life, and the other was about intervention and imposition of change on the circumstance of the individual that emerged into what we know today as medicine. Both have their place. I don't want to live in a world without medicine, and I don't want to live in a world without healing and health. What we're talking about today, ladies and gentlemen, is no different than what the ancients talked about. It's no different than what Thompson and Wells and Coulthard fought for 100 years ago. And what I think is so exciting about this moment, I began with some dates talking about Shakespeare and 419 years ago and Burns 235 years ago. And I hope we can have the vision to look back in just 3 years on the 100th anniversary of the first adjustments in chiropractic occurring during the year of the first graduation of the first graduating class of the Australian Chiropractic College. You're the people that have made it be. You're the people that have put your money, your faith, your hard work, your reputation, your character to bear on behalf of this institution. We're not done. There's so much more to be done. The need continues to be great, but the opportunity to bring forward an educational experience for students that will give them vision, inspire them with dedication, and give them the skills and tools that were given to Thompson, to Wells, and Coulthard a century ago, to deliver those adjustments that change lives and that begin to manifest a different destiny in the people who come under their hands. For all of those people, generations to come, and for all of the people sitting around you and their families over time, I beg you, I pray you, stay the course. Stay solid behind Patrick. Stay solid behind the administration and the board. Work hard. When they ask for a check, write it. I've been there. Sometimes they write easy, sometimes they write hard. The ones that write hard are the ones you remember as the sweetest. So as you gather in Adelaide today, again, I'll offer my apologies for not being with you. And I want you to know how very, very much I miss the opportunity and how proud I am to be associated with all of you in this great endeavor that we call the Australian Chiropractic College. My best to you and your family. Beware of the Ides of March. There's another day to come, and we'll see each other soon. Thank you very much.